Good afternoon and welcome to a session where it's my very great honour and privilege to introduce Elizabeth Lev of Duquesne University. Elizabeth Lev holds degrees in the history of art from the University of Chicago and the University of Bologna, and she's been teaching art history at the University of Mary's Rome programme since 2022. She also teaches for the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, as well as St. Vincent's College. And Elizabeth Lev is, as I'm sure you all know, a well-known Rome and Vatican tour guide, and she's lectured on the history and the art of Rome all over the world. She writes regularly for numerous outlets, including First Things, Sacerdos, and Inside the Vatican magazines, and her 4 books include The Tigress of Forlì, Roman Pilgrimage, A Body for Glory, and her latest book, The Silent Night, A History of St. Joseph as Depicted in Art. She's presented a TED Talk on the unheard story of the Sistine Chapel, and she's appeared on many television and radio interviews, from ABC's Nightline to the Today Show. She was featured in the series Museum Secrets for History Television in Brad Meltzer's Decoded, and she was the host of Catholic Canvas, a 10-part television series on the art of the Vatican museums, which aired on EWTN. And her talk for us today is entitled New Light, Caravaggio's Contemporary Take on Ancient Teaching. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Elizabeth Lev.
Wow. It's me, Caravaggio, and a whole lot of time. It's like the ultimate luxury in my life. And there I was, I'd sort of prepared something short and snappy, and instead I get to digress, which is always one of my favorite things to do. And let's see, we can get these things on the roll, on the way I want them. Let's see, all right. And we seem to have a little bit of a blockage here with our slide advancer. It seems to be cranky with me. Yep, that's exactly, yep, there we go. If it is me and technology, I think I bring this from Rome. We have been known to say in Rome about technology, yesterday's technology, tomorrow. So I apparently bring that particular malady wherever I go. I can take the most state-of-the-art systems and crash them into the ground by my mere presence. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about someone who obviously he's what they might describe as so hot right now. That has been the case for about the last 100 years, but particularly so this year in the Jubilee year of 2025 because of the blockbuster show that occupied Roman hearts and minds for most of the year, to the point where they extended an extra month and there was a lot of crying over tickets. I know that because I was on the receiving end of many of the tearful phone calls. And it was an interesting show. It was kind of, the curators called up everybody who had a Caravaggio painting and said, would you send one? And then they created a kind of show and organization out of it. But what I would say is that because of that, and because it is a monographic show, it's a show on a single artist, it really gave us the opportunity to think a little bit more about this remarkable painter. And as I started thinking about this conference, I began to realize that, if there was ever anybody who developed as an artist under an overwhelming weight of tradition, it was Michelangelo Merisi. So we're talking about a man who is born in Milan, and when he is born in Milan, it's a few short years after the close of the Council of Trent. So bear in mind that the close of the Council of Trent means that in the final meeting of the Council of Trent, which is a little heads up for art historians, it's the last thing they talk about on the last day. So just in case we think we're the be-all and end-all of things, it's like we're like a footnote to Trent. But Trent really gets very interested in whether or not the church is going to patronize art. So Caravaggio is really born a few short years after this new thinking about how art is going to be presented and how artists should communicate through art. So that's sort of the first thing he's going to grow up under. He's born in Charles Borromeo's Milan. So you again have the weight of this incredible cardinal who is working very hard to bring back the traditional teaching of the church, the traditional practices into this very ancient diocese of Milan. So he's got this kind of weight of this very, very formidable figure that's going to make the city in which he is ultimately formed. Then he has that rather unfortunate coincidence that being born on September 29th, his parents named him after Michael the Archangel, which of course made his name Michelangelo, which got to be a little awkward when he got to Rome and he was basically told, I'm sorry, that jersey's been retired. But nonetheless, he is dealing with this incredible weight of what is the transformative period of art, which is, of course, the Renaissance, in which his namesake is this remarkable figure. And I mean, I tend to think of it this way. I mean, if you were to look at Caravaggio on paper, so you're thinking about hiring an artist, and Caravaggio shows up with his resume. All right, so at the moment, he's living with a guy called Mr. Salad, Monsignor Salad, because he's just working for like enough food to get by. His present occupation is that he's painting holy cards, which are those, you know what they are, those little sort of devotional things that are coming out a dime a dozen. He was born again September 29, 1571. He has his parents. It's a very, very difficult situation. His father and uncle die in the plague of Milan in 1577, and then his mother dies just a few short years later when he is essentially a teenager. He was educated, as far as we know, he probably had a 4-year apprenticeship under an oil painter named Simone Peterzano, and his work experience is in the studio hand is for a guy named Antiveduta Grammatica. Have you heard of him? Yeah, not many others had either. And then he got this kind of job doing fruit and flower painting for a very well-known painter at the time whose name was Cavaliere d'Arpino. And when it came down to that part of the resume, which is going to deal with skills, right? So in the Renaissance, what are you supposed to be able to do? You're supposed to be able to draw. How's that going? No. Can you use fresco? No. Can you sculpt? Can you engrave? And what about the background check? No. So, you can kind of understand that in this particular environment, it's going to get very, very hard for Caravaggio to get work, especially because the Renaissance builds up this idea of who the artist is supposed to be. He's supposed to be this figure which represents personal holiness, to this upright, successful businessman. They're looking for a lot of different things from the artist, and so. The problem is that the way I kind of think of Caravaggio is it's like he's an artsy Jason Statham, right? So he's basically a model turned actress. And he's a guy who's really not coming out of the right kind of training, trying to enter into a very, very competitive world. And so he eventually graduated from pious pictures to this more naturalistic painting, because he was a painter who worked in oils. And one of the biggest problems Caravaggio had is that he did not work in the traditional type of art. The traditional type of art for painting on walls, painting large surfaces, is fresco. Caravaggio is an oil painter. Unfortunately, Michelangelo, the big one, the big M, capital M, he had actually pronounced his opinion of oil painting back in 1545 when he explained that oil painting is for women, Germans, and lazy old men. So there he is, coming to Rome with his kind of weak resume, this oil painting, but the things he can do with that oil. And he catches the eye of a very, very important, he gets a series of important patrons who start looking at what this young man can do with oil. And so they first shuttle him into a series of works which seem to be appropriate for someone in his formation. You can do a boy with a basket of fruit. You can do a basket of fruit. You can do musical boys with fruit. I mean, but at the end of the day, there is a deep frustration within this artist who is trying very, very, very hard to make a name for himself. He knows there's something more that he is destined to do, but he just keeps getting dropped into this same pattern. But it's a pattern that's working out very well for him. The most wealthy patrons in Rome are piling up to hire him to do works that are, however, destined to go in people's living rooms. So he can make a lot of money, he can be quite successful, but he's never going to really have a public voice. And we can see something of the frustration with this in these very early works. This very beautiful work, that two of them were ultimately purchased by Scipione Borghese, who got on late to the Caravaggio that wagon, but he definitely got on it with a vengeance. And so he obtains, I can't say purchased, the means by which he obtained art was slightly questionable, but he obtains this very beautiful painting, which is a very early one. You'll notice the question mark around the date. It's because Caravaggio's got another problem. The problem is that if you get to be about 21 or 22 and you haven't made it into the history painting, so not painting fruit and flowers and musical boys, which is kind of a genre painting or still life painting, if you haven't made the leap to history painting by the time you're 21, 22, 23, not much chance that you're ever going to do it. It's like if you've never won a regional final in gymnastics by the time you're 7, you're not going to the Olympics. And so Caravaggio is facing this type of problem. And so in this very, very beautiful painting, we see the remarkable skills of the still life painter, that wistful expression of the boy who is painted with that delicate brushstroke, that sort of soft, dreamy brushstroke that gives us this kind of air of a kind of reverie. But then when we look closely at that mesmerizing basket of fruit, we begin to see something else happening. And the unbelievable talent and what he could coax out of oils. Look what he's making that basket of fruit illustrate. For example, you'll have the incredible representation of the 3 fruits. You have an apple, a peach, and I think that looks like some cherries there in the middle. Each one, it's the same 2 colors. Each one has a slightly different surface. So this is a really, this realism that he's able to bring to the table that's almost photographic. But then if you look over to the right, I mean, you would kind of think, you're right, that's right. If you look over to the right, you'd wonder, maybe he should have thought about getting a food stylist, because that big yellowing leaf that's already got a little bit of holes to it, and if you look a bit, once you notice the leaf, you might notice the rotting grapes, and it might begin to occur to you that if you leave that basket out for a little bit longer, it's going to be overripe. And so Caravaggio, in this very elegant way, he is using this particular type of art. It's called a vanitas, something that indicates the passage of time, these things that come and go. It's a very interesting way that he's showing you a vanitas. Time passes, the fruit will soon be overripe. But when you apply it to his situation, you realize here is a man who is deeply concerned about the time passing. And so at the same time, he produces another work, which is called The Sick Bacchus. And the sick Bacchus is again another figure of a young boy who seems to be all set up for partying, right? He's dressed up in his little toga party. Not like I would suggest anybody at Notre Dame knows what that looks like. And he's holding his grapes, and he seems like he's there for fun. And yet, everything is a little bit off. The boy seems to be consumed by something within that's rotting. You see the grapes in his hands that are already showing signs of being overripe. Yet the 2 fruit sitting on the stone slab, they look underripe. And again, when you start to think about this artist who's caught between these 2 worlds, he's at one hand, he's about to age out of the possibility of entering into the golden circle of art that preaches. And at the same time, he doesn't have the maturity, he doesn't have the formation, he doesn't have what he needs. He's unripe to be able to enter that world. And so Caravaggio's these images seem to show a man who finds himself in a very, very difficult position. It's like he's trying to win an Oscar by only doing commercials. So he's finally noticed. And the man who discovers him and helps him immediately puts him to a series of extremely complicated tests. The man will be Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte, who was a very, very close friend of Ferdinando de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. This guy has the ear. This guy has a friendship. He was personal secretary to Ferdinando when he was still a cardinal. They know each other very, very well. And suddenly, Francesco Maria del Monte, Cardinal del Monte, is putting forward this artist, having him produce works which he's sending up for his friend, the Duke, to look at. And immediately Caravaggio gets put into very, very dramatic confrontation with a tradition in art, with a double tradition in art. The first one is he's going to have to produce a Bacchus painting in 1596, which is complete, interestingly, 100 years exactly after Michelangelo, age 21, produced his Bacchus statue, which is owned by the Medicis. It's going to go into direct comparison with that dreaded namesake of his. And so both of them, what they share, what Caravaggio is comfortable with, is showing that same almost very fast and easy treatment of the ancient model. When Michelangelo produced his work, it was rejected. It was rejected because it didn't look like that. The central version is an ancient Roman statue, a Greco-Roman statue of a Bacchus. And that's the way they thought statues of Bacchus are supposed to look. And when Cardinal Riario bought or commissioned Michelangelo's Bacchus, he was expecting a taut, handsome, very, something that could be passed off for an ancient work. And Michelangelo gave him a drunk frat boy. So Michelangelo already started a tradition of kind of nudging and winking at the ancient model, something that Caravaggio carried on. So when Caravaggio, I'm actually going to back this up so you can see the painting a little bit better. When Caravaggio does his version, it's the same thing. That's a soft drunk boy who's basically trying to do that test. Look, I'm doing it, by the way. They can't use that as an excuse if anything goes wrong. So the fact is that he's doing this kind of figure that's tilting, holding that glass by its very delicate stem and offering it to you. So what is Caravaggio doing? He's taking that kind of way of looking at an ancient tradition, being very provocative by showing underneath it the yellowed mattress. The rotting fruit appears once again in the foreground. Caravaggio is taking something where Michelangelo has opened a door. Caravaggio is going through it, and he's adding his new element, which is a very direct provocation of the viewer. Right? So this time the Bacchus is looking at you. The other Bacchus, you walk around it, he doesn't notice you. That's because Michelangelo's Bacchus is well and truly drunk. In the case of Caravaggio's Bacchus, when you walk up to that painting in the Uffizi, you're standing right across him. You can't avoid it. It's all about you. And so it becomes a much more powerful means, an immediate means of communication. And this is really where Caravaggio's strength is going to lie. And just as another example, because apparently I have time, is I'm going to show you, I just want to show you that the contest doesn't end there. The next thing that Cardinal del Monte asks of Caravaggio is to do a shield with the head of Medusa. Which, okay, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that the other prized possession of the Medicis is the shield with the head of Medusa produced by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, who lived in Milan, where Caravaggio was from, for 18 years. Leonardo da Vinci, who was the one who started working in oils. When Michelangelo was complaining about oils, Leonardo was pioneering oils. Leonardo was a man who brought naturalism to a whole new level, and now he's being put in the ring with that famous legacy. And so where this is not Leonardo's, it's perhaps made from Leonardo's. It's a very, very famous story in Vasari. You can't get away from the story if you read the history of art, that Leonardo went to the market and bought every creepy crawly he could possibly get his hands on, turned his room into like the scariest science experiment ever, and then produced this shield for his very first patron. This was his very first job. That was so scary that the patron ran away when he saw it, thinking it was really Medusa, which of course is obviously a trope to let us know how realistic and how extraordinary the painting of Leonardo is. But the Medicis owned it, and now Caravaggio's is going to have to sit right next to it. And what does Caravaggio do? He does the same thing. He's very good at hyper-realistic art. So the serpents actually look like something that I would not want to come across ever under any circumstances. But what he adds again is the immediacy. That is the second that Medusa's head has been removed. The shock, the horror, the anger, the rage, it's all in that expression. Caravaggio puts you there in the moment. So Michelangelo is the moment before Guy. Everything's about to happen, right? David's about to fight Goliath, fingers about to touch. Leonardo gives us that moment after. Jesus has just said, one of you will betray me, and we watch the ripple effect. Caravaggio is the moment of Guy. And that is what he is going to bring to the great tradition of art. So finally, it happens. Actually, before I get to that, I should say, part of the reason why I'm very interested in this Caravaggio's questionable resume is that it has allowed Caravaggio, and again, I heard this for the entire season of the Caravaggio show, it has allowed Caravaggio to become the poster child of the man who flaunted tradition, the man who didn't like tradition, the man who managed to get pleasure and a payday at the expense of a Catholic church that funded his paintings because he was enabled by a whole bunch of vice-ridden prelates. And there's a lot of sort of looking at and understanding of his art from this point of view, to the point where it often happens when people are looking at the art of Caravaggio, the average person going into these places, going to this show, they're hearing about a man who, well, no one ever did anything like that before, and no one's going to do it like that, and Caravaggio didn't really care about that tradition, and he was going to break all the rules and show you how it should be done, and it's really all about his own vision. And I do not agree. First of all, Caravaggio's intense frustration with doing those vanitas paintings is evident in The Boy with the Basket of Fruit, particularly in the Sic Baxis. He's looking and looking and looking and looking for an opportunity to get into the big leagues. What are the big leagues? These are paintings that are going to go into public religious spaces. This is the opportunity for Caravaggio to enter into the golden world of the history painter for a sacred space, a world which was governed by painters, described by Charles Borromeo's friend, Cardinal Gabriele Capagliotti, who wrote a treatise for painters 10 years before Caravaggio was born, in which he described painters as mute theologians, tacit preachers. So this is an opportunity for painters. Painters are being given an opportunity in this last part of the 16th century to flank preachers, to enter into this world where they are going to communicate. But what are they supposed to communicate? They are supposed to be communicating truths and tradition. This is the Catholic Church that is funding these works. These are the prelates, these are the religious orders of the Catholic Church. And so Caravaggio suddenly becomes a figure that they are interested in, despite the terrible resume, despite the fact that you'll probably have to bail him out of jail a couple of times, despite the questionable company he keeps, which is really somewhat problematic. He gets this job in 1599 that will change his life. In the French church of San Luigi dei Francesi, the French church dedicated to St. Louis of the French, they are beginning a campaign to prepare the church for the Jubilee year of 1600. 1600 was just as much of a big deal as 2025 is, except they were a little bit more organized in 1600. In particular, there's a lot of focus on the French churches, the churches in France and the French National Church in Rome. Why? Because just before the Jubilee year began in 1595, before the Jubilee year in 1595, the King of France, or the man who was supposed to be King of France, Henry IV of Navarre, had returned to the Catholic Church. Huguenot. In 1595, the famous line that some of you may know, Paris is worth a mass, which he may or may not have said, that sees the King of France returning. What do you think the papacy is thinking? Oh, today France, tomorrow Germany. And so they get really, really excited. Maybe England, maybe not. They get really, really, really excited at the possibility of using this tremendously public conversion as the opportunity to talk about conversion, and within the sense of conversion, a calling. And they want conversion homilies, they want everybody to get on board, and the cardinal who is in charge of San Luigi dei Francesi, the National Church of St. Louis of the French, his name is Matthew Contarelli, and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to commission a chapel. It's right on the pilgrim route, so all the pilgrims are going to go there. You all know in art the rule is location, location, location. And so pilgrims are going to go there. I'm going to have a painting done showing the conversion of St. Matthew, the calling and the conversion of St. Matthew. Now, he doesn't live to see it done. He hires the most famous artist in Rome at the time, who is Caravaggio's old boss, Cavaliere d'Arpino. Cavaliere d'Arpino doesn't really understand how important the commission is, so he never shows up for work. It's 1599. Clock is ticking. Jubilee is starting. This is exactly what my end of my last year was like. Jubilee is starting. Why is nothing done? They are desperate. And Cardinal Del Monte basically says, I'll paraphrase here, I got a guy. And that guy is Caravaggio. So Caravaggio gets his chance to do his first public work. There are a million exceptions they're going to have to make for him. Sidewalls are supposed to be done as murals. They're going to have to accept oil painting. And so the subject matter has been very clearly laid out, but Caravaggio isn't able to do certain kinds of complex drawings. So Caravaggio is coming into this commission. He will do the calling of St. Matthew on one side. On the opposite side, there will be the execution of the martyrdom of St. Matthew. He does not get the altarpiece, which is the most prestigious of all the works. He doesn't get it in the original commission. The altarpiece actually shows up a couple years later when they realized, hey, wait a minute, this guy seems to be pretty good. And so the painting is something that a lot of people have done before. Now, it's not the most popular subject matter in the history of art. The calling of St. Matthew is not something that we see a lot, but there are certain patterns you can see in the works that were produced before, which means that Caravaggio, there are certain things that we think he's doing that are new, that are not new. So first of all, in this one, which is in the town of Prato, by Niccolo Gerini, we can see there's Matthew sitting in the middle. Matthew wears contemporary dress. The idea of artists comparing Matthew to contemporary story, that's not new. Like, oh wait, guy gives up all of this money to follow Jesus. I wonder if that has practical applications for today's world. Of course it does. And so a lot of people think of that. And this really wonderful one, this is from an illuminated manuscript from the 15th century from Bourges. You can see Matthew, he's not only wearing contemporary dress, but he's sitting in front of a pile of money, right? So there's that sort of reminder that this guy's got a lot of stuff. In the German, in the Flemish one, was Marian Vesreyers, I can't pronounce his last name. You can see Matthew and Jesus. Matthew is now set into a very, very obvious tax collector's stall. Like, it's very clearly like the kind of stall that you would expect to see in basically the northern countries. And in this one by Victor Carpaccio, which is incredibly beautiful, notice the fabulous clothes he's wearing. It's like, yes, let me take out my fabulous silk Venetian Fortuny robe to follow Jesus. So it's not a question of the idea of emphasizing what Matthew has, the idea of emphasizing what Matthew does through very naturalistic representation. The Flemish are the ones who pioneer oil painting. The idea of having Matthew be clearly a person who's tremendously privileged, that's not the new part. But what is interesting about all four of those examples, and other examples I could show you, is you'll notice how direct the conversation is between Jesus and Matthew. In all four cases, like, it's really clear that Jesus and Matthew are like, they're the only people there. And then like a couple apostles standing outside the door going, oh, I wonder what's going on in there, which is kind of what they do in most paintings, right? He's talking to the Samaritan women. They're like, oh, what's going on over there? So Jesus has a very direct conversation. Here in the Carpaccio, the other guys are standing in the background, the conversation. Jesus is actually literally taking Matthew by the hand. Like, it's like, come with me right now, right? So now let's look at Caravaggio's once again. Caravaggio instead gives us a very, very different situation. We can see there's some sort of space. It's maybe a tax collector's stall, it may be a tavern, it may be the VIP room at a club where dealers do business. Whatever it is, he is in a space that they dominate. The men in this space dominate it. Then Caravaggio brings that incredible oil painting naturalistic skill to bear when he paints silk, velvets, brocades. These men are wearing clothes that for everybody in the 16th century or the 17th century, it basically looks like the Vuitton, Ferragamo, Versace of that world. They clearly are people of privilege. He retains the idea of the money on the table. You can see the vast amount of money on the table. He adds a special touch of status. The sword in the foreground is basically, it's like having the iPhone that nobody can get. So you are looking at an amazing array of people who have, there are a bunch of people who have everything, but they live in darkness. All around them, there is this heaviness, this darkness, which we don't see in these other paintings. They're surrounded by this sort of this pall that seems to oppress them. And so at this moment, the 5 men sitting around the table, in walks those 2 men. They're bare feet. They're certainly not wearing right clothes for this particular dinner reservation. And so they bring with them this new kind of light. At that exact moment, everything changes through this light that they bring. Not so much the characters, not so much this very frontal. We saw Jesus very frontal, very obvious in the other paintings. It's clear, like, hi, I'm Jesus, I'll be talking to you today. Jesus is actually obscured by the figure of St. Peter. And with Jesus comes this light. And here is where Caravaggio picked up the 3rd member of the Holy Trinity of Renaissance painting. We can see him going head to head with Leonardo. He picks up a lot of the naturalism, even the way he arranges the figures in the group comes from thinking about Leonardo. He's thinking about Michelangelo, and we'll see that more in the last set of paintings. But this one, for what will be his ultimate transformation, he's looking at Raphael. Raphael, who 100 years, 80 years earlier, had been working in the apartments of Julius II, competing with Michelangelo too, by the way. Everyone has to compete with Michelangelo. And he's painting the Liberation of St. Peter. And the Liberation of St. Peter shows 3 distinct types of light, right? So you'll have here on the left, here is the, oh, wait, I think I have one of these. Oh, look at that. All right, so here we have the torch, which produces a kind of orangey light. Here is the pinky light of dawn. There is silvery moonlight. None of that light can compete with that. That is a supernatural light. That angel could not bend a bar to save his life, right? That angel looks like an ectoplasm. It's certainly not a Michelangelo angel. He'd be like mussing up to the bars. In Raphael's painting, the power of the angel is the power of the light that he brings with him, that pushes against the wall and strains against the grate. And Caravaggio looks at that and says, and what if I took out the angel and just left the light? And he's so convinced of how well this light can communicate that he will put in that window, the window which produces no light. You are immediately to understand you are not looking at a natural light. You are looking at a supernatural light. This light where these 5 men sitting around, something happens, but really only one knows how to respond to it. And this is where Caravaggio really shakes up and yet continues this idea of tradition. It's like Caravaggio's own version of the chosen. There is Jesus with that remarkably ambiguous gesture and 5 different reactions to the gesture. 5. Now, this is a really, really bad video. I took it, so just be patient with me on this one. It's just to show you a little bit about how the room works. The painting of the martyrdom of St. Matthew is in the sign. The Matthew writing the gospel is the altarpiece. And I want you to just be aware of the fact that when you are looking at the calling of St. Matthew, you are standing at the outer side of the chapel looking towards the altar, so you are actually someone approaching this table. So you've got Jesus and Peter coming one way, and you, viewer, are coming in the opposite direction. And as you look at this array of people, it is once again that Caravaggio who is very interested in capturing or communicating directly to the viewer. This is the kind of art that the Catholic Church is looking for. It's not so much what your resume says. Can you wake people up and get them involved? And so Caravaggio presents a scene. Everybody knows this scene. Everybody preaches on this scene. And Caravaggio makes the viewer part of the scene. How does he do that? He does that by presenting this variety of reactions. So we have the first two young men who are closest to Jesus. I'm only going to choose three of these. I'm going to show you three. But you have and he's completely dazzled by the light. And he's a young man who's just completely absorbed and taken with it, and will probably get up and wander and follow. Maybe he'll stay, maybe he won't, because he's young and he's really excited by this new thing that happened. But he doesn't have that little voice going on in the back of his head that an older man might have. A man who worked his entire life to get to that table, whose everything he's done is invested in being that guy at the table. This guy who thinks it's already done. I've already lived my life. Now I'm just going to kind of wait around, watch my grandkids, and just be done. Who wonders, he can't possibly be me. And on top of everything else, that man, I'm actually going to back up and show you this picture one more time. Look where that man is. He's wedged into his world. He is someone who wakes up every morning, he knows what he's supposed to do, everything is supposed to be planned out, I've already got it, I've made it this far, I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm whatever age he is, I'm done. And then this crazy light shows up and awakens him, and he responds with the utter shock and amazement that one does. But there is a third type of response. And the third type of response is at the furthest part of the table. It's the furthest from the altar. It's the furthest from Jesus, and it is the closest to us. How many of you have been to see that painting? Okay, now how many of you have been to see that painting in high season, where like you are fighting your way to get to the front with a whole bunch of people who don't even know why they're there? Like they're in there because like, oh, there's something for free we can come look at in here. I was like, I just had an Aperol Spritz. I probably should wait like a couple minutes before I have another one. I was like, what do you mean I can't bring my gelato in here? So, I mean, I'm sure they don't all talk like that. But at the end of high season, I kind of feel like they all do. And so you're standing there with people who are pushing you out of the way, who are completely, they don't know who painted it. They don't know what the subject matter is. But they're there because they're curious. But they're so absorbed with the here and now that the power of that painting, while it is there and while it is ready to be taken, it just passes right over them. It glances above their heads. He creates a painting where it's not just about that one guy at the table who happened to look up and go, I wonder if there's more than this. And that's when the light was. He's there to talk about the people who may not know why they're there. As a matter of fact, one of the most beautiful things in this painting to me is that pair of hands, right? So here we have the young man. Yes, I know there's a theory that he's Matthew. It's completely wrong. We can talk about in the Q&A, okay? So for 1,000 reasons. But so you have this young man who's holding onto the coins, but that's Matthew's hand holding onto the coin at the same time. He has to make a decision. Am I going or am I staying? And that's a decision that is common to calling. I'm not taking it away for those of you who are consecrated and see this painting as a member of calling, as a symbol of calling. But do not forget that this painting was made also for a Jubilee year. And it's meant to be in a public church, in a public place where everyone can see it. It is a painting about conversion and a very common call of conversion. These two guys at the end, they're going to look up about 10 minutes later and go, hey, where'd Matthew go? And the real reason why I think you can say that is because obviously you have this beautiful, and the ambiguity of the gesture is fascinating. You can clearly see that there seems to have been some memory that Caravaggio had from going to see Michelangelo, his famous namesake. But that gesture of Jesus is actually the gesture of Adam. And it's not a very pointed, not a very overt and violent gesture. Whereas it's Peter who has the much more. If you look at Peter, it's Peter who has the much more, yeah, I mean you. And so this idea of sort of the calling, the moment you see the light, and then the structure of the calling, which draws you on your path. This way of illustrating conversion, first and foremost in the tradition of the encounter. And then in second stage, how do you follow that encounter? How do you start upon that path? You start upon that path by following in the footsteps of the successor. But here's the thing I care the most about in this painting. The thing I told you at the beginning is Caravaggio is interested in two things. He's interested in getting the viewer directly involved. The other thing he's interested in is urgency. There is nothing about Caravaggio's art that suggests that whatever is happening is really going to take place 10 minutes from now. Caravaggio is the man who famously has Judith with her sword halfway through the head of Holofernes. I did not put this picture in because we just had lunch. But the fact of the matter is that when he is looking at, when you look at the feet of Jesus, which I'm sorry, this is actually, there's too much light for you to be able to see it. But if you pull this up, as you all have phones and all does this is Jesus's foot, and Jesus's other foot is here. And unfortunately, in mine, I can see it very clearly, but it doesn't come out very well here. One of Jesus's feet is down. The other one, the heel is lifted up. He's walking. Jesus is leaving. So there really is in this painting the urgency. It's Matthew who looks up at just the right moment. It's Matthew who has to extricate himself from that life and follow Jesus. The people at the far end, Jesus is waiting for them. Don't get me wrong, he loves you. It's all very good. Whenever you're ready, he's ready too. But that is not the message of 1600. It is the message of 1600, the way that Caravaggio paints. The thing that makes him so valuable to this era is he is the guy, it's right now. The moment is passing. Get up and go. So, now Caravaggio, at this point, I think one of the most important things to realize about him is that he will never, ever go back to secular subject matter again. So for a man who was looking for a payday, guy is just like looking to do something that could raise his rates, like I'm just going to do this big thing and then I can just charge more money because, hey, I'm the guy who did San Luigi. The rest of his life will be completely engaged in religious subject matter. He will be in demand wherever he goes, even after murdering Ranuccio Tommazzoni, which was awkward. No matter where he goes, he will be in demand as a man who can communicate religious truth powerfully. And so my final sort of consideration, my final set of paintings, has to do with what it is that makes Caravaggio the guy who can do that. The guy who can take these ancient traditions of showing these ancient stories and make them feel so fresh and so new and so part of our lives. So this is the next work he gets, because the way it works in Rome, if they hire you for one thing, they hire you for everything. And so he immediately gets another job to work in Santa Maria del Popolo, even more prestigious because it's the first church you encounter when you enter the city of Rome. So when you come into Rome, there's the Porta del Popolo. 80% of people entered through the Porta del Popolo, and there they are. There's the church of Santa Maria del Popolo. If you have managed, the 100-mile walk, you got to Rome, you're still alive, the first thing you want to do is go in and thank God. Right? So you walk into the church, you go down to this brand new chapel at the end where everybody is buzzing, and there you see this chapel dedicated to the Assumption of the Virgin and to Peter and to Paul. Now, this is again another moment where Caravaggio seems to have, his resume was working against him because he was given the side paintings, whereas the central painting was given to a much more prestigious painter, a painter who was really much more in line, sort of friends with Pagliotti, went more in line with the traditions in art. And yet Caravaggio will find a way to work within that. Now, here's the biggest problem he's facing. This is the ultimate competition because this particular pairing of the subject matter, I'm going to back up for a second so you can see it again. Usually in Rome, this is a little bit of insider Roman baseball, but in Rome, when we show Peter and Paul, we show them both dying on the same day. It's a very old tradition that they died on the same day, which is June 29th, which makes them twins because they were born in heaven on the same day, and the city being founded by Romulus and Remus, we really like the way that all works together, and so we usually, almost always, up until this period, which is in 1545, they show the death of Peter and the death of Paul together. That's how we always do it until the Protestant Reformation. When suddenly we have a group of people saying, yeah, I'll be listening to Paul, but I don't really know what Peter has to do with anything. And then we have the Catholics who are like, oh, let's build St. Peter's faster, okay? And so the Pope who's living through this, the Pope who actually has to navigate this, is Paul III. And Paul III he decides to build inside the Vatican, right outside the Sistine Chapel, a new chapel. He's going to hire Michelangelo to do the death of St. Peter and the conversion of Saul. It's the first time that these two scenes will be paired. So for the very first time that we're going to try to think about putting this Saul who needs to transform into Paul and the death of St. Peter, which happened a stone's throw from where these are painted, the man who did it first was Michelangelo. So that's no pressure. And so Michelangelo pulls out all the stops. And these are very, very, very impressive paintings, especially since they've just been cleaned, so they are dazzling. And you see how he paints all of these people, these very theatrical scenes. This is within the papal court. It's painted in the papal court. It's a painting of public witness. We're in the midst of this great era of debate and combat. And so there is Peter looking up from his cross, looking out at the future pope, basically saying, this is the job description. And then on the other side, you have St. Paul, and once again, this extreme sports Jesus flying down upside down, coming down in order to shock Saul into existence. So to begin with, he's got this incredible competition he has to do with. This is incredible competition with Michelangelo. And then on top of that, he is to face the Bolognese mafia. The Caravaggio family, I'm not going to digress too much into it, but you should realize that there was this really remarkable family of painters who did everything you were supposed to. Oh, yes, we fresco. Oh, yes, we draw. No criminal record. We teach. We help orphans, right? Hung out with the right people. And so they were the ones that Annibale was the one who got the commission for the Assumption. And so there he is competing against the past, competing against the present, and he comes up with something that still rivets people today to the point where I have to make people look at Annibale and go, no, he's a really good painter, please look at him. And so in the martyrdom of St. Peter, the martyrdom of St. Peter, we can see his taking of the crowd scene, and he turns it into really four people. And this is the beauty of Caravaggio. In a certain sense, it's one of his weaknesses. As someone who can't draw, he can't really do crowd scenes. But as someone who works to his strengths, he realizes you don't really need all those extra people around Peter. What you really need to drive home is what is happening inside. And that is what his art is able to do with this new and exciting type of light he's using. So you have four men. First part is you'll have the dirty feet, right? Sort of scrabbling in the dark. Then you're confronted with, if you've ever been to see the painting, there's a mustard-colored rear end, which is not your usual encounter when you come to see a painting. And that's really, though, just a muscle group, right? It's just like a hoist. It's lifting the cross. He's just using the gluteus maximus muscle. Then if you look up a little taller, a little higher, you'll see the little bit of red on his shoulder. That's another muscle group. The blotch of red showing you the shoulder, lifting the cross into place. The green for the back, lifting the cross into place. Not one of those faces is visible. So these three men, they're all working. They're all just doing their thing. They're cogs in a machine. They don't think about what they do. They work in darkness. They are in the dark. They do not have a clue what's happening. When you say, forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. They're not even there. They're more like animals. They're more like machines than they are people. Look at Peter. Peter's body, now I grant it, he's quite fit, but he's not represented in that kind of idealized, Armani model way that they usually like to show bodies. In the Renaissance, he's got a big, tough fisherman's body, and that man, too, is also working. And he works stretched out on that cross, and this time, instead of looking up at the future pope, he looks at the nail in his hand, willing himself, going the distance. His job is to stay on the cross. And because he knows what his job is, to be a witness to the bitter end, it is he who is suffused with light. Because again, it is he who sees clearly Christ and what he must do to follow Christ. And it's a very powerful, very intimate way of focusing the viewer on A, this role of Peter, and B, that the viewer is just a few feet away from where this happened. But the work I really wanted to close on, the one I really wanted to talk about most, is the conversion of Saul, because it seems to have caused Caravaggio some difficulty. This is his second public work, so the San Luigi is his first, and Santa Maria del Popolo is the second. He does a first version of the conversion of Saul, which was the coolest thing about the show, by the way. This is usually in the house of this princess, and they're having a divorce, and they never let anybody in. It's just torture trying to see this work, and it's so important. But you actually, during the exhibition, we got to see this regularly, and now in the Italian, the way the Italian system works is that when the two are fighting, the Italian state wins. So since there's a fight in the house, I'm pretty sure that's going to end up in a museum in no time, so you can all go see it. The fact is that the first version is a pared down version of what Michelangelo was doing. Clearly, Caravaggio went back to sort of the Michelangelo matrix, looked at it and started thinking, okay, we've got a big horse turning, we have a soldier holding up his shield here. There's actually a second soldier down here who's standing like this. Here we can see those themes, like the guy who's pulling away over here, this guy holding up his shield. We have upside down Jesus coming in, doing this Saul. We have an older Saul covering his eyes in very similar type of positions. So clearly the first one was kind of like a play it safe version. And then he changed his mind. And he did this second version. Now, to be perfectly honest, art historians just argue about whether or not it was rejected or he changed his mind. I am in the school that thinks he really just changed his mind. Also because it fits better with the painting across from it. They pair each other extremely well. Now, in this work, Caravaggio has removed basically everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody, because you may notice there's someone missing in the story who really ought not to be missing: Jesus. And so he produces this very interesting image of the conversion of Saul, in which Saul, for the very first time, is not holding his hands up over his eyes. The horse trope is a very old one, that's always there, but the horse is not some beautiful, wild, not beautiful thoroughbred horse, which is meant for a great warrior. That is literally like the cheapest rent-a-car that you could find on the lot. Like, I gotta get to Damascus, just give me something. Well, we got this junker, okay, I'll take it. I mean, it's nothing beautiful about that horse. It's a workhorse. It's got his little minder in front of it. And the horse occupies basically all of the space in the painting. The fact is that the horse, the minder, everything seems, they have no idea what's going on. Instead of putting in Jesus, Caravaggio, once again, used that very dramatic light. The light that cuts through the everyday world. All that naturalism, all that realism, all this is what it probably really looked like, that seems so anti-tradition, is actually a way of expressing and emphasizing the point of the story, focused the world of the 1600s with the printing presses and the pamphlets and the contradictory ideas, and everybody's got theories about this and that and the other thing. There's so much noise that Caravaggio used that light to focus on the one thing that matters. The encounter in which you see. When Matthew looks up and he sees Christ and understands this is it. When Saul falls from his horse, encounters Christ, and this case, instead of showing resistance, as he does in the first one, he opens his arms and he accepts this. And it's interesting to me because Saul is so young. And I think about those young boys that he painted in the beginning of his career, these very youthful figures, and how those youthful figures have matured. And this new Saul, who is young, but deciding to give his life to something. And so that brings me to the very, very, very last point. And it just has to do with Caravaggio's recognition of his own unworthiness. And that in a certain sense, the work that Caravaggio, he's well aware of the fact when he walks in the room, and everybody else makes him aware. Yeah, I'm sorry, what school did you go to again? Which degree do you have? They make him aware of his unworthiness every single moment. But Caravaggio took that unworthiness and he turned it into this way of speaking to a public in a much larger, much vaster, much more powerful fashion. And when we think of, I just was pulling up the quote from St. Paul in this conversion of Saul, when Paul says, "Even though I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance and unbelief. The grace of our Lord was poured out on me abundantly, along with the faith and the love that are in Jesus Christ. So this idea of looking at Caravaggio, I'd like to propose a different way of looking at this man. That this man's biography, his problematic biography, that unworthiness is what actually makes us all able to look at him generation after generation. The crowds that are sitting there, the people who are moved, the people who feel drawn to conversion, because they see in Caravaggio's work that way, that supernatural light that this man drew on from traditions in art. He brought in that supernatural light to show how it can cut through reality, grittiness, brutality, and shine on everyone. And this is what made him so invaluable to a church that was trying to make a universal, trying to set forth a universal message in an age of very divisive noise. And that's all she wrote.
Well, thank you so much for that enthralling talk. And we could just spend the rest of the session applauding, but there are probably some questions as well. So if you have a question, there are people with microphones coming round to you. Perhaps you could raise your hand and keep your question until there's a mic there for you to speak, and maybe stand up so you can be heard. I see a question in front here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charlie. Thank you for that. To call me a casual in this space would be very generous and charitable. I know nothing about art. And I know you explained it a little bit, but I'm not exactly understanding why he wasn't getting his flowers earlier, because his paintings are so clearly very good. So can you just explain that a little more?
Okay, yeah, ooh, wow, thank you. Wow, magic. So the question is about, like, what's the problem with the flowers? You're right, I should have explained that better. So in art in the 16th century, our artists begin to diversify, and they create a kind of hierarchy in art. So there's art that they consider like worthy, and art that's considered less worthy. And so the highest forms of art were called, it's called history painting. So you're painting either a mythological subject or you're painting a biblical subject. And that, if you're in that golden circle, that's like being an A-lister, right? You get to work with Nolan, and you get to work with Scorsese, and you get to do all that kind of stuff. Then after that comes like portraits, and then things like still lives or genre paintings. Genre painting is everyday life. So this idea that as you get further away from like the ideal, like the biblical or the sort of the Greeks and their mythology, the further you get away from that, the less good art was. And he was, in many ways, this is one of the things that made him much more of a subversive artist, is that he kept throwing in these things that were considered, lesser. He kept taking a genre scene, and thanks to his use of light and thanks to his very focused way of painting, that genre scene suddenly gets elevated. So the painting that there's so many, I don't even know where to begin, but actually there are only 80, but that would have been a long day. And but the fact is, the painting that he does in Naples called the Seven Acts of Mercy, it's like a whole bunch of people doing weird street stuff. But because of the way he shines the light, you understand that these people who look like people that you would probably cross the street to stay away from are actually doing holy things. So he's bringing out this sort of inner beauty in them. And so that was kind of the problem. And so if he continued to do paintings of just flowers and fruit and boys, those are paintings, those are drawing room paintings. They would have just been in people's houses, and no one would have ever been talking about him. He would have been like, he would never be able to put something in a place where he really was able to speak to a large group of people. I really do like my comparison to trying to win an Oscar from doing commercials. That help? Thank you. Really, really good question. Thank you.
Thank you. I see two people just here.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first is, can we perhaps expect a book by Elizabeth Lev on Caravaggio? And the second is, can you speak to the theological background or the theological formation of someone like Caravaggio, or maybe artists in general? Because I'm always struck at the depth of the theology that they're able to capture in these pictures. I know there was, when I studied in Rome, there was an art professor who said he had to hire a priest to give catechesis to his students because they couldn't read art and they didn't know anything about it. I don't think Caravaggio went to theology school. Maybe it's something about the depth of being that the artist experiences. But if you can speak to the kind of formation that would influence and impact the way in which he can capture theology so brilliantly.
Well, that is a very, very helpful question. I'm actually going to stand up. I feel weird talking like this. So, no, you stay seated, or you consider. Yeah, be comfortable. Come stand over here. It's weird. Actually, I'm going to come over here. Yes. Yes. The first question is yes. That's the reason why we took this. I decided to do this. Bishop Barron was good enough to ask me to write a monograph on Caravaggio, which I am wrestling with when I'm not doing this. See, I'm actually, but since it's being recorded, look, I'm working. So the other question, which is really, really fascinating, in the case of Michelangelo, I can answer that very easily in that he clearly is around people from when he was a young man. He's around very, very serious. There's a formation element to what happens in the Medici Gardens when he's a young man. It's obvious. In the case of Caravaggio, he is very hard. He has a brother who's a priest that he doesn't talk to. But there is, first of all, we have to remember, and I don't think you have to remember, but I think it's good for the rest of us to remember that the world that he lives in is saturated with faith. I mean, people may be arguing about it. We may be having reformations. We may be having, what people think about the Blessed Sacrament or the sacraments. But nonetheless, the year is parsed by the feast days. And everybody fasts, and everybody, it's a world that really does live its faith much more intensely. So just by that, the familiarity and the understanding of the exegesis of a biblical story is just something that people have much more. In our very literate age, we are shockingly illiterate about the faith. But there is a really interesting nexus. Caravaggio's primary patrons, besides Cardinal del Monte, are all part of the circle of Saint Philip Neri, known as the Apostle of Rome. And so here is this man who is coming from Florence to literally re-evangelize Rome. He's helped by a group of very, very, very wealthy people who happen to also be art collectors, and they bring Caravaggio into their fold and into their houses. And there is there's a whole other way that I was thought about taking this talk. I'm so glad you asked this question, because you see the end of my notes. It's all Philip Neri this, Philip Neri that, but then there comes a point where you're trying to cram too much into a talk. But I'm so glad you mentioned it, because Philip Neri permeates everything Caravaggio does. The dirty feet, the emphasis on humility, because again, between Charles Borromeo's personal motto and the humilitaire, and Philip Neri's really working with the proud, prideful young men in Rome to increase humility. Like, that's the virtue, he says. And then Caravaggio's later works, which are so incredibly obsessed with the idea of humility. I think one of the most important pieces of that puzzle is indeed, for formation, it's Philip Neri. But at the end of the day, my real argument with Caravaggio, what makes him truly formed, is that he is a sinner. He's a public sinner. Everybody knows he's a sinner. He has to face it every single day, and yet here he is putting paintings in churches where other people are going to look at him. And so somewhere in there, in that intensely, his art is always so intensely personal. Whether it's Matthew or Peter or Saul or Judith, it's always this interior response. And I think it's that that struggle that he has, that he's willing to put on paper, put on canvas, between dark and light, that's really the most compelling theological thing. It has nothing to do with training. It has to do with an awareness of himself and his relationship to light, as it were. Whew. Next.
There was a question just over here. Thank you.
Thank you for such a beautiful presentation. You had mentioned with this, the calling of St. Matthew, that there are competing theories as to which figure at the table is
I thought you might take me up on that.
And well, because as someone who's never seen this painting before, my first impression was that it was in fact the figure. I'm saying this as someone uneducated, but my impression was that, you know, the man sort of slumped over and reluctant was St. Matthew, but I was wondering if you could shed some light on that.
Yes, glad to. So here's the thing. The painting was always understood. Everybody who's ever written on the work, everybody has understood throughout the history of art, copies made of the work, all other people who did copies of it, who derived from it, because I showed you works before it, not afterwards. So all derivations, they point out that this man is Matthew, okay? Who also bears a greater similarity to the man writing the gospel and the man who's dying on the opposite side. So it does have a continuity to it. In 1980, an art historian from Melbourne, Australia, came up with the idea in a very short article with no proof whatsoever that this was Matthew. It was repeated by another Italian art historian with a shorter article with less proof, and then it has become very much the life's work of a very, very close friend of mine. So we've debated this on Italian television, and yeah, so we work together. We're very, very good friends, but this subject cannot come up at a dinner party, and so she is the one who is most invested and done the most work to claim that this is Matthew. Now, so there's some really technical stuff here. There's some very technical stuff here. One has to do with there's been recent imaging that shows that the hand of Jesus. The hand of Jesus, I think this figure, wait, hold on, I'm trying to remember how this works. The hand of Jesus is indicating towards this figure. This figure was not actually in that place at the time when it was first painted. So there's a lot of very sort of technical indications that theory is off. Also, when you look at the way, the problem is the finger here, that the finger seems to be pointing this way, but when you look at the way Caravaggio wants to show a finger pointing inwards, he's not very good at drawing. I told you that at the beginning. He'll put a line of light that goes all the way down to the very end of the finger. In this case, the line of light goes only partially down the finger, which would indicate that it's supposed to turn inwards. All of these things, I mean, we can argue about this till the cows come home. The problem with this image being the figure of Matthew has to do with just the message that it's sending. And that's where this gets interesting, and I'm extremely grateful to my friend who is Sarah Magister, if you want to read her point of view. Sarah Magister has what she really made me think about, and Pope Francis also, who seems to have ascribed a bit to this theory. What this is very attractive at our age. So it makes perfect sense to me. And that's actually where that whole element of this talk comes from, was thinking about that aspect where it is ambiguous. I mean, there is, in Caravaggio's own time, there is no such thing as, yeah, I'll be converting, I'll be there a little bit later. If you follow if you think this is Matthew, the logical conclusion is that Jesus is sitting there going, okay, whenever you're ready, and when you're done, yeah, okay, so we'll just give an appointment, I'll see you later on. I mean, the idea is that somehow you finish doing your thing, and then you get up. And so that would make Caravaggio the moment before guy. But there's nothing in the art of Caravaggio to suggest that he was ever the moment before guy. And that's why that feet element here is important, because it suggests that Jesus is already moving. So Jesus is talking, follow me, and he's already gone. And so by the time the other guy looks up, Jesus will already be gone. So the spirit of conversion in 1600 is not convert when it's convenient, or Jesus is waiting for you and you just do whatever you want. But it is very much part of our age. And the way that we see our relationship with Jesus waiting for us, whenever you're good, Jesus is always there. This very, and it's a beautiful thing about the merciful Jesus. And Jesus is merciful in the 1600 too, but we see, it tells us a lot about the society that looks at this and wants to see Matthew in the guy who's still busy with the here and now, and Jesus who is waiting patiently for him. And I promise you, and I'm not a theologian, I don't really get to make this promise, but I promise you, Jesus is waiting for you, and if you want to wait, you and Jesus can work it out, but he'll be there. But that's not the spirit of a holy year. The spirit of a holy year, the spirit of 1600 is right now. And so the immediacy of this man who is jammed in his life and looks up just at the moment the light hits him, that's what the 1600s talks about. That's what a Jubilee year is looking at. So the fact that he can speak to the impetuousness, like, I want to do this right now, which doesn't necessarily mean they're going to follow through. These guys, yeah, I'm too busy. And this guy, wait, am I supposed to leave all this? That's a really beautiful sense of universality. I think it's part of what makes Caravaggio so universal. I hope that helps a bit. Okay.
This is the moment before. There is time for one more question. Yeah, I see this person here. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. My question was, you mentioned that you made the reference of the phone to the iPhone. The sword to the iPhone, which I thought was very helpful and really helped me become aware of the scene as an everyday occurrence. But what if we took the sword out for an iPhone in present-day art? Is that something possible, a good idea to put technology in masterpieces of art in churches if it helps convey the message better to perhaps our age or not? I don't know.
I think that's the reason why I was using The Chosen as an example. The Chosen takes these characters that show The Chosen, takes these characters and they become extremely contemporary. Like, they may be wearing maybe like dirt and sandals stuff, but they act in a very contemporary manner, and we can imagine them. Like, they have the same kinds of issues and weaknesses and problems and concerns and messes that speak a great deal to us. So I don't see why a work like that couldn't. I don't know that in painting we just don't respond to painting quite the same way. But I don't know that you couldn't make an image of Matthew, a story of Matthew, something of Matthew that shows him in a way that speaks to our own age of what it would look like to ask, the CEO of a hedge fund who's sitting there with his other little CEOs and, about to get on his private plane, I know you have to come with me, just so that he can, live in poverty with a whole bunch of people who are going to say, you cheated me on my taxes, and then you can die horribly, stabbed several times while you're baptizing. It could be worse. It could be skinned alive. But anyway, so I do think there is a way to make that story contemporary. I just don't. Outside of these chosen people, I'm just not seeing it happen very often, right?
That's all we've got time for. Please join me again in thanking Elizabeth Lev for this wonderful
Thanks, everybody.